Imagine this, two of the world's greatest superpowers, empires upon which the sun never set, bristling with cannons, warships, and armies that spanned the globe. Now, imagine them on the brink of a devastating war, all because of a pig. It sounds absurd, like a forgotten comedy sketch, but in the summer of 1859, this was the reality on a remote, fog-shrouded island in the Pacific Northwest. This is the story of the Great American Pig War, a bizarre and almost unbelievable chapter in history, where a single farm animal nearly dragged the United States and Great Britain into a full-scale conflict. Our story begins on San Juan Island, a lush, green jewel nestled in the Salish Sea, between what is now Washington State and Vancouver Island, Canada. By the mid-19th century, this island was a powder keg waiting for a spark. The Oregon Treaty of 1846 had established the 49th parallel as the border between American and British territory, but it left the ownership of the San Juan Islands ambiguously defined. The treaty stated the border should follow the middle of the channel which separates the continent from Vancouver's island. But there were two main channels, the Haro Strait to the west favored by the Americans and the Rosario Strait to the east favored by the British. Depending on which channel you chose, the islands belonged to a different country. So, in this contested no-man's land, a strange and tense community developed. A few dozen American settlers had put down roots, claiming land and starting farms. Meanwhile, the powerful British Hudson's Bay Company had established a large sheep ranch called Bellevue Farm on the southern tip of the island, seeing it as their sovereign territory. The Americans saw the British as trespassers. The British saw the Americans as squatters. For years, they coexisted in a state of uneasy, grumbling truce, a microcosm of the larger geopolitical rivalry between their two nations. Enter our two main characters, neither of whom knew they were about to step onto the world stage. First, we have Lyman Cutlar, a determined and perhaps a bit hot-headed American farmer who had recently arrived to try his luck in this new frontier. He had staked out a small plot of land and, like any good farmer, had planted a precious potato patch, hoping for a good harvest. Our second protagonist was not a man, but a pig. A large black boar, to be precise. This pig belonged to Charles Griffin, an Irish-born employee of the Hudson's Bay Company who managed the nearby Bellevue farm. Griffin's pigs were known to be free-roaming, often wandering far from the company's land, a common practice at the time, but a constant source of frustration for farmers like Cutlar. On the morning of June 15th, 1859, Lyman Cutlar walked out to his garden and found his worst fears realized. There, rooting around and feasting on his prized potato crop, was Griffin's large black boar. This wasn't the first time. Cutlar had complained before, but nothing had been done. This time his patience snapped. He grabbed his rifle, took aim, and fired. The shot echoed across the quiet island. The pig fell, dead. A single act of a frustrated farmer, but it was the spark that would ignite the powder keg. Initially, Cutlar tried to do the right thing. He went to Charles Griffin, confessed to shooting the pig, and offered to pay for it. Cutlar offered $10. Griffin, outraged, demanded $100. To put that in perspective, $10 was a fair price for a pig at the time. $100 was an astronomical, almost insulting sum. Cutlar scoffed, supposedly retorting that he wouldn't pay that much for a pig, even if it had been stuffed with the finest potatoes. Griffin was incensed. He reported the incident to his superiors at the Hudson's Bay Company, and the British authorities were brought in. Word of the crime spread like wildfire. The British officials, viewing the island as their sovereign territory, saw this as more than just a dead pig. It was a challenge to their authority, a blatant act of disrespect by an American squatter. They threatened to arrest Lyman Cutlar and transport him to Victoria for trial. This threat was all the American settlers needed to hear. They saw it as British tyranny, an attempt by a foreign power to impose its laws on American soil and on an American citizen. They immediately sent a petition to the U.S. military authorities emociones in the Washington Territory, pleading for protection. The man who received this plea was Brigadier General William S. Harney, the commander of the Department of Oregon. Harney was a man known for his aggressive nationalistic views and a pronounced dislike of the British. He saw this not as a dispute over a pig, but as a golden opportunity to assert American sovereignty over the San Juan Islands once and for all. Without consulting his superiors in Washington, D.C., Harney made a bold and unilateral decision. He dispatched Captain George Pickett Yes, the very same George Pickett who would later lead the infamous Pickett Yes charge at Gettysburg with a company of 66 soldiers from the U.S. 9th Infantry. On July 27, 1859, Pickett and his men landed on San Juan Island, set up camp near the Hudson's Bay Company farm, and raised the American flag. Pickett declared the entire island to be U.S. property. The escalation had officially begun. The British were stunned and furious. The governor of British Columbia, James Douglas, was a man of action, a former Hudson's Bay Company chief who was not about to be intimidated. In response to Pickett's small force, he ordered 3 British warships to the island. These were not small patrol boats. They were powerful vessels, including the HMS Tribune and HMS Satellite, armed with dozens of heavy cannons and carrying hundreds of Royal Marines. They anchored in Griffin Bay, their guns trained directly on Pickett's small, vulnerable encampment. The standoff was on. On one side, you had Captain Pickett and his handful of infantrymen dug in behind makeshift earthworks, rifles at the ready. On the other, you had a formidable British naval squadron, with enough firepower to obliterate the American position in minutes. The British captain, Geoffrey Hornby, was ordered by Governor Douglas to land his Marines and drive the Americans off the island. But Captain Hornby, thankfully, was a man of cooler temperament. He recognized the insanity of the situation. He reportedly said it would be folly and madness to start a war between 2 great nations over a squabble about a pig. He refused to take the aggressive action ordered by the civilian governor, arguing that he would not involve 2 great nations in a war over a pig. Despite Hornby's caution, tensions remained sky-high. Both sides continued to build up their forces. The Americans reinforced Pickett's company until there were nearly 500 soldiers on the island, armed with several cannons. The British, in turn, increased their naval presence to 5 warships, carrying over 2,000 men and more than 70 cannons. For weeks, the 2 forces faced each other down, a hair's trigger away from a catastrophic conflict. Soldiers on both sides could see each other, shout at each other, and surely curse each other under their breath. They were in a state of high alert, muskets loaded, commanders pacing nervously, waiting for the order that could plunge them into battle. Back in Washington, D.C., and London, news of the crisis on this distant island finally arrived, carried by slow-moving ships. Officials were horrified. Neither the U.S. President, James Buchanan, nor the British government had any desire for a war, especially not over such a ridiculous pretext. The last thing they needed was a third war with each other. They needed to de-escalate, and fast. President Buchanan dispatched the highest-ranking officer in the U.S. Army, General-in-Chief Winfield Scott, to resolve the crisis. Scott was a veteran of the War of 1812 and the Mexican-American War, a respected diplomat and a seasoned, level-headed leader. After a long journey, the aging general arrived in the region in October. He immediately met with Governor Douglas and began negotiations. Scott was everything General Harney was not: calm, diplomatic, and reasonable. He quickly established a good rapport with his British counterparts. He officially reprimanded Harney for his overzealous actions and managed to get both sides to agree to a sensible compromise. The agreement was simple. Both the United States and Great Britain would withdraw the bulk of their military forces, leaving only a small token presence on the island. The Americans would maintain a company of no more than 100 men at their camp, and the British would establish a similar-sized camp of Royal Marines on the opposite end of the island. This arrangement of joint military occupation would remain in place until the border dispute could be settled permanently through diplomatic channels. With the agreement in place, the tension that had gripped the island for months finally broke. The soldiers, who had been enemies just days before, began to fraternize. The American and British camps were just a few miles apart, and they started visiting each other, sharing stories, tobacco, and perhaps a few forbidden drinks. They celebrated holidays together and even held friendly athletic competitions. The island, which had been a stage for a potential war, became a scene of unusual peace and camaraderie. This peaceful joint occupation would last for the next 12 years. Finally, in 1871, the United States and Great Britain signed the Treaty of Washington, which addressed several outstanding issues between the two nations. As part of the treaty, they agreed to resolve the San Juan border dispute through international arbitration. They chose Kaiser Wilhelm I of Germany to be the arbitrator. In October 1872, after reviewing the evidence and the language of the original 1846 treaty, the Kaiser and his commission ruled in favor of the American claim. The international boundary, he declared, should run through the Haro Strait. The San Juan Islands, including the site of our infamous pig incident, were officially and finally declared to be territory of the United States. By November, the last of the British Royal Marines peacefully withdrew from the island. The joint occupation was over. The crisis that had started with a single gunshot had ended without a single human casualty. The only life lost in the entire affair was that of the unfortunate pig. The pig war serves as a fascinating, almost comical footnote in history. It's a story of how stubborn pride, nationalistic fervor, and a simple farm animal could bring two world powers to the very edge of war. But it's also a powerful reminder that diplomacy, reason, and the calm judgment of a few good leaders can avert disaster. It shows that even in the most tense and ridiculous of standoffs, cooler heads can prevail. And so, the story of the pig, the farmer, and the two empires ends not with the boom of cannons, but with a quiet diplomatic resolution. It's a testament to the strange and unpredictable nature of history, and a conflict where, in the end, the only casualty was dinner. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this piece of peculiar history, don't forget to subscribe,